Hello, this is the 254th edition of Catch of the Day, available on the Branch Talk YouTube channel. Today we're going to continue reading from a book written by Trent Wilde entitled The Mosaic Torah. Starting near the bottom of page 10 we read, "In the next several pages you will find a translation of these manuscripts. We have placed in the left column a translation of the LXX, which represents DG1, and in the right column a translation of those parts of the MT which are not found in the LXX, representing DG2. If both columns are read together, you get the context of the MT. As you read, it will become apparent that the texts in each column were indeed originally separate documents. Not only do the manuscripts show this, but the content itself testifies to this reality. When read together, as it is in the MT, the story is somewhat confusing. Goliath is introduced as if for the first time in 17 verse 23. Even though he had already been introduced in 17 verse 4. And Saul has no idea who David is when he sees him going to fight Goliath, and even after David returns from his fight and speaks to Saul face to face in 17 verse 55 to 58. This in spite of the fact that Saul had already taken David on board as his personal musician in chapter 16 verse 18 to 19, made him his armor bearer, 16:21, and clothed him with armor for this very fight with Goliath, 17:38 and 39, just to name a couple of examples. On the other hand, when each source text is read on its own, there is no such points of confusion, and everything flows quite smoothly. This itself is strong evidence that these texts were originally separate. It is easy to imagine writing a text, deleting sections of it, and the remaining portion still making sense. But what isn't so imaginable, at least not realistically, is the deleted portions also making sense when read on their own. And for both the remaining portions and the deleted portions to be made more sense on their own than when read together. But this is precisely what we have with the story of David and Goliath. If you start with the MT and read the sections only in the LXX, they make sense. If you read the remaining sections without the parts paralleled in the LXX, they make sense. When you read it all together, it is confusing. This simply would not be the case in everything we have in the MT if the MT originated as a single literary work. The only reasonable explanation is the one that the manuscript evidence already demonstrates to be true. The MT contains a combined version of two originally separated works. Read on and see for yourself. Footnote number 7. There are instances in which the MT and LXX differ in passages which they share, the more significant of which we have pointed out in the footnotes. We have likewise noted instances where the MT editor appears to have altered DG1 and DG2. David and Goliath, 1 Samuel 16:14 to 18 to 30. And the Spirit of the Lord withdrew from Saul. And an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him. And the servants of Saul said to him, Look now, an evil spirit from the Lord is tormenting you. Now allow your slaves to speak before you, and seek for our master a man who knows how to play on the lyre. And it will be that when the evil spirit comes upon you, then he will play on his lyre, and it will be good for you, and it will calm you. And Saul said to his servants, Look now for a man for me, who plays well, and bring him to me. And one of his servants answered and said, Look, I have seen a son of Jesse, a Bethlehemite. He knows music, and the man is wise, and the man is a warrior, and is wise in his speech, and a man good in his appearance, and the Lord is with him. And Saul sent messengers to Jesse, saying, Send your son David to me, the one with your sheep. And Jesse took an homer of bread, and a skin of wine, and one kid from the goats, and he sent them by the hand of David, his son, to Saul. And David came to Saul and stood before him, and Saul loved him greatly. So David became an armor-bearer for him, and Saul sent to Jesse, saying, Now let David stand before me, because he found favor in my sight. And it happened that when the evil spirit would come upon Saul, David would take out his lyre and played it with his hand, and Saul would recover, and it was good for him, and the evil spirit consistently withdrew from him. Now the Philistines gathered their army for battle, and they were gathered in Succoth of Edom, and they camped between Succoth and between Ezekah, Ephes, Dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel gathered and camped in the valley. They formed ranks for battle opposite the Philistines, and the Philistines stood on the hill on one side, and Israel stood on the hill on the other side, with the course between them. And a strong man came out from the Philistines' camp. Footnote 8. The Mt says, which belongs to Judah instead of Edom. 9. The Mt adds, of Elah, in order to tie DG1 with DG2. Even DG2 later specifies this event to take place in the valley of Elah. 17 verse 19. This is a clear example of the editorial work of the Mt compiler. His name was Goliath from Gath. His height was 4 arm lengths and a span, and there was an helmet on his head, and he was wearing a coat of chainmail, and the weight of his coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze and iron. And he had bronze greaves on his legs, and a bronze shield between his shoulders. And the shaft of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spearhead was 600 shekels of iron. And the carrier for his weapons went before him. And he stood up and shouted to the camp of Israel and said to them, Why have you come out to prepare for battle opposite of us? Am I not a Philistine, and are you Hebrews of Saul? Choose for yourselves a man, and let him come down to me. Take care.